Finally speaking out about the father she hardly knew, Frances Bean Cobain has been silent for 30 years. Kurt's last pictures with her, the covert letter he wrote before she was born, and the heartbreaking reality of becoming rock's most well-known orphan. Today, we are revealing a daughter's unvarnished, heartfelt narrative, attempting to comprehend the premature departure of the father. Kurt Cobain was born in Aberdeen, Washington, a tiny town, on February 20, 1967. I grew up in a difficult environment. Due to the fading timber industry and the high unemployment rate, the community was having difficulties. Donald and Wendy, Kurt's parents, were very young when they had him. His mother was only 19 years old, and his father was 21. Life was not simple. However, there was something unique about Kurt from the beginning. His family was deeply involved in music. In addition to his great-uncle, who was a vocalist who had appeared in a film, his uncle was a band member. Kurt had a unique quality as well. Later on, his left-handedness would distinguish his guitar playing. He was talented from an early age. By the age of 4, he was already playing the piano and creating short tunes, and by the age of 2, he was singing. Music was his passion, and favored bands like the Ramones and the Beatles. He spent hours pounding on his first drum kit, which he received when he was 7 years old. He received his first guitar from his uncle on his 14th birthday. He never attended classes. He simply solved the problem on his own. In a few weeks, he was able to perform AC/DC classics like Back in Black. However, Kurt's life was not solely focused on music. His parents' divorce caused a lot of problems at home. At the age of 9, it was a powerful blow. He fell silent and irate. He even detested both of his parents, writing it on the wall of his bedroom. Between 1976 and 1982, he lived in 12 different residences. He remained with relatives, including his parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and friends. It was impossible for him to feel secure or like he belonged somewhere because he was always on the move. Kurt was just 12 years old when his mother handed his father full custody of him in 1979, but things didn't work out. Kurt's father remarried in 1980, and he unexpectedly had 2 step-siblings and a stepmother. He felt alienated in his own house. As a result, there were arguments and Kurt began to act out. He started becoming impolite to adults and harassed children at school. Kurt felt even more alone after his father sent him to therapy and no efforts were made to bring his parents back together. By 1982, Kurt's actions had gotten out of control for his father. He was sent to live with other family members and even friends by his father. He had spent time with his friend Jesse Reed's family, who were very devout. Kurt briefly became a Christian during this period, although he later renounced Christianity completely. Kurt later used this event as inspiration for the Nirvana song Lithium, in which he envisioned a man resorting to religion in order to keep from collapsing. It broke Kurt to go from place to place. Years later, he said in an interview that he felt ashamed of his family circumstances. He expressed his desire for a typical family, consisting of a mother and father, and his resentment towards his parents for not providing him with it. Kurt's high school experience wasn't any better. He attended Aberdeen High School, which was located in a small, gritty logging town. He stood out negatively due to his artistic and sensitive nature. His classmates harassed him all the time. They referred to him as queer and faggot, particularly after he made friends with an outspoken gay student. Kurt was unconcerned. He also played into the accusations by claiming that, although not being gay, he was glad to be perceived as such. He believed that everyone should leave him alone. Bullying continued after that. He had suffered tremendous humiliation at the hands of a group of boys. He carried scars from these encounters for the remainder of his life. Sports also caused Kurt and his father to argue. Kurt detested the fact that his father wanted him to play baseball and wrestle. For the sole purpose of annoying his father, he would purposefully lose games or strike out. Feeling alone, Kurt began to act out in modest but daring ways. In addition to spray painting sayings like "God is gay" on vehicles, he was detained for spraying graffiti on a wall. Except for art class, he didn't find schoolwork particularly interesting. His passionate and somber drawings revealed the inner turmoil he was going through. By the time he reached his senior year in 1985, he had lost all interest in education. He left school when he found out he didn't have enough credits to graduate. From there, it became even more difficult. His mother told him to find a job or leave the house, so he was expelled. She advised him to go after packing his belongings when he failed to locate employment. Kurt slept on couches for the next 3 years, occasionally sneaking back into his mother's basement when he was homeless. Kurt's song Something in the Way was inspired by the well-known tale that he resided beneath a bridge beside the Wishkah River. Friends subsequently said that this was not totally accurate. He didn't stay there for very long, although he did spend some time there. During this difficult period, Kurt took on odd jobs, such as janitorial work at his former high school, or working on the sands of an oceanside resort. His music was greatly influenced by these hardships, even though he barely made enough to get by. Kurt's discovery of punk rock in 1984 made a huge difference in his life. Tapes of bands like Black Flag and the Sex Pistols were given to him by his friend Buzz Osborne of the Melvins. As soon as he heard it, Kurt felt as though he had discovered his calling. He considered punk rock more than just music. It resonated with his rage and dissatisfaction with the world. He started experimenting with his guitar and cutting his hair in an attempt to mimic the loud, rapid sound he admired. Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain met at a local band's rehearsal room on May 7, 1985. Kurt persuaded Chris to join him for months because he was determined to form a band. He handed a recording of his music project, Fecal Matter, to Chris. Christ's attention was drawn to one beautiful hymn. Finally, in December 1987, they came together to create a band. It was called Nirvana. However, the start wasn't simple. They lost the drummer they had. 5 drummers appeared and disappeared in 3 years. It seemed as though everything may implode before they had even begun. After Chad Channing joined in 1988, the band experienced some stability. Even their use of the word Nirvana was first uncertain, but it began about this time. March 19, 1988, was the day of Nirvana's debut performance in Tacoma, Washington. The flyer, which Kurt produced himself, listed their previous identities, including Pencap Chew, Ted Ed Fred, and Skid Row. They were sued shortly after by another band, Nirvana, for the name. They silently ended the altercation and retained the soon-to-be famous name. They were still struggling when they recorded their debut album, Bleach. Jason Everman, a guitarist, paid $606.17 to pay the recording expenses because they were short on funds. Although Jason didn't contribute a single note to the album, they gave him credit to give him a sense of inclusion. It was difficult to record. In 1988, they began working on Christmas Eve and worked in the studio for 3 long days, ending in January 1988. When the album was released in June, it didn't sell very well. Just 40,000 copies or whatever. It was spotted by someone significant, but no one outside the underground music community really paid much attention. Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth was a huge fan of their music and spread the word about them. She helped Nirvana sign a contract with DGC Records in 1990. Kurt and Chris believed it was their opportunity to reach a wider audience, but other Seattle fans accused them of selling out without discontinuing their musical endeavors. The band The Pixies served as Kurt's inspiration. He enjoyed their ability to create subdued music that abruptly became harsh and loud. Kurt chuckled when he and Chris penned Smells Like Teen Spirit, claiming that people would criticize them for sounding so much like the Pixies. Pixies frontman Black Francis was not offended by Nirvana's imitation of their style, even going so far as to laugh about it. Kurt liked the Pixies' gentle mixing. Nirvana's music was largely composed of a combination of aggressive sounds and appealing melodies. Signing with DGC Records seemed like a huge turning point for Nirvana. They received 2 records for $287,000. They gave each band member around $95,000. It was less than it appeared to be once managers and other expenses were paid. In order to facilitate matters, Kurt arranged for them to get $1,000 each month. Even with this sum of money, Kurt feared being labeled a sellout. He detested the thought of their original admirers no longer respecting them. The 1991 publication of Nirvana's second album, Nevermind, permanently altered Kurt Cobain's life. No one anticipated it growing to such a size. Initially, the record label anticipated that it would sell roughly 250,000 copies. But when the song Smells Like Teen Spirit was out, everything was different. MTV broadcast the music video, which featured a crazy high school pep rally, non-stop. All of a sudden, Nirvana was well known. The song was a great smash, peaking at number 6 on the Billboard charts, a significant accomplishment for a rock song at the time. The album sold millions of copies by January 1992, just 4 months after its debut, and it even overtook Michael Jackson's Dangerous for the number 1 spot. Kurt himself was shocked at how quickly everything happened. It was so daunting, he once said, that he felt he needed a course on how to be a rock star. A joke inspired the term Smells Like Teen Spirit. Kurt's wall was spray painted with the song "Kurt Smells Like Teen Spirit" by his friend, musician Kathleen Hanna. Although Kurt was unaware of it, she was discussing a deodorant that his girlfriend used. It sounded deep, so he decided to use it as the song's title. For a generation, the song became a symbol. Nirvana's popularity did more than only make them well known. It transformed music. Prior to Nevermind, grunge was a little fad, primarily in Seattle. However, grunge emerged as the most popular musical movement following Nirvana's breakthrough. The 1980s gaudy hair metal bands had lost their appeal. Several major record labels began signing grunge bands, including Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden. Even MTV began showcasing grunge instead of slick pop videos. Additionally, the grunge aesthetic gained popularity. Seattle musicians wore cheap clothing from thrift stores, such as torn trousers and flannel shirts. But all of a sudden, this style was in. Grunge was never about fashion, therefore it was amusing that high-end designers even began to imitate it. All of this fame was difficult for Kurt to cope with. He detested the term "voice of a generation," which was used to describe him. He had no desire to act as a representative. All he wanted was to create music. He felt uneasy under the pressure and frequently rebelled against the music business. Kurt mocked the band's forced playback of their song on a British TV show by acting out of character and singing in a deep, goofy voice. He used it to make fun of the phony character of celebrity. Kurt also had a hard time being honest in his music. Kurt wanted to return to their punk roots, but Nirvana's success with Nevermind made people expect them to write more songs like it. He ensured that the sound of their subsequent album, In Utero, was rough and unadulterated. At first, the record label didn't like it and even declined to release it until several of the tracks had been altered. Making hits was not important to Kurt. It was important to him to stick to his vision. At Nirvana's MTV Unplugged performance, this struggle against being overly commercial reappeared. Rather than performing their most well-known songs, such as Smells Like Teen Spirit, Kurt included lesser-known tracks and even covers of other bands' songs. Despite MTV's disapproval, Kurt refused to back down. He treasured his artistic freedom, as seen by the performance, which went on to become one of the most well-known live performances ever. Kurt was uncomfortable with Nirvana's success, despite Nevermind's enormous impact. Its polished sound embarrassed him at one point, and he even likened it to the music he used to despise. In Utero sounded so different because of this. It was difficult for Kurt to enjoy his success because of the pressure, expectations, and his own issues with fame, even though he tried to fight back against the popularity and keep his music authentic. Throughout his career, he struggled with this internal conflict. Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, on the other hand, had a turbulent romantic relationship. They were married in a modest ceremony on Waikiki Beach in Honolulu, Hawaii, on February 24, 1992. Only 8 individuals, including Dave Grohl, the drummer for Nirvana, showed there. It was anything but a conventional wedding. Courtney was dressed in an antique outfit that had formerly belonged to actress Frances Farmer, while Kurt was dressed in green flannel pajamas. The song "Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle" by Nirvana was named after their unconventional fashion choices. On August 18 of the same year, they brought Frances Bean Cobain, their daughter, into the world at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Because her sonogram made him think of a kidney bean, Kurt decided to give her the middle name Bean. There was controversy at the start of their strong relationship. According to some accounts, they initially met in 1989 at a concert in Portland, while other accounts placed their first meeting at a nightclub in 1990. In 1991, a close friend, Everett True, demanded that he present them. Regardless of when they first met, they had a close bond. They became close through art, music, and, regrettably, drug usage, which dominated their shared life. Their pleasure was upended by a significant scandal shortly after Frances was born. In September 1992, Courtney was accused of using heroin while pregnant in an article published in Vanity Fair. As a result, there was a media frenzy, and many began to doubt their capacity as parents. According to Courtney, who refuted the allegation, she was misquoted and quit using narcotics as soon as she learned she was expecting. The Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services conducted an investigation in spite of her denial. They were separated from Frances for 2 weeks, making things more difficult for the relationship. In the 2015 documentary montage of Heck, she acknowledged using heroin during the first 3 weeks of her pregnancy, but she was unaware that she was pregnant at the time. This admission rekindled discussions about addiction and parenting in the public sphere. The connection between Kurt and Courtney was frequently covered by the media. For many, they resembled Sid and Nancy in the current day. A pair enmeshed in a downward spiral of dysfunction and addiction. They were often tabloid targets because of their issues with substance misuse, mental health, and stardom. Many people criticized Courtney harshly and held her responsible for Kurt's problems. According to a 1992 Vanity Fair piece, she was a train wreck who was allegedly using Kurt to advance her own career. This portrayal was widely accepted. Even after Kurt passed away in 1994, some admirers still blamed her. In spite of the criticism, Kurt stood up for Courtney. In a heartwarming occasion, he once expressed his gratitude to a young fan for their complimentary remarks about her. On March 3, 1994, Kurt overdosed in Rome, which was one of the most traumatic events in their relationship. The overdose was initially described as an accident, but Courtney disclosed after several years that her fleeting contemplation of an affair was the catalyst for the effort. She claimed that even though nothing happened, Kurt must have realized something wasn't right. Their already difficult lives were made even more difficult and complicated by this tragedy. Private film from Hex montage revealed a different aspect of their lives, despite the fact that their relationship appeared tumultuous on the surface. Home film showed their sincere passion, laughter, and moments of love, displaying their relationship's more tender, human aspect. Their narrative wasn't as straightforward as the media frequently presented, as these glances demonstrated. Kurt Cobain's problems started with an incessant agony that didn't seem to go away. Due to a pinched nerve associated with scoliosis, he began experiencing significant stomach pain in the late 1980s. It was difficult for him to concentrate on anything else since the agony was so severe and never-ending. The agony wore him down physically and mentally over the years. In 1993, Cobain resorted to heroin as a coping mechanism after attempting numerous unsuccessful therapies. Getting high wasn't the point for him. Finding a way out of anguish that seemed unavoidable was the goal. He described how heroin, if only temporarily, relieved the excruciating anguish. The pain remained with Cobain, and his addiction grew. It was obvious to everyone around Nirvana that he was having difficulties during his tours. He felt as though he couldn't continue when his pain got so terrible during a 1991 European tour. Even though heroin caused him additional issues, it became his means of getting by. After Nevermind, Cobain felt stuck, even though Nirvana rose to become one of the most popular bands in the world. He wasn't content with his celebrity, it simply increased the pressure. He had little time for appropriate medical care due to his frequent travels, and the drugs he took didn't really help. He continued to use heroin, stuck in a vicious circle of suffering and addiction. The situation was further complicated by Cobain's mental state. He had emotional difficulties from a young age. After receiving an ADD diagnosis as a child, he was subsequently diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This implied that he would alternate between intense grief and a high level of enthusiasm. Those near him noticed these changes. He might be friendly and gregarious at times. He seemed aloof and agitated at other times. He expressed these emotions in his songs. His highs and lows were reflected in songs like Lithium. Despite being able to communicate his inner struggles through his songs, Cobain was reluctant to ask for assistance. He feared that therapy or medicine might stifle his creativity, which he held in high regard. It was also quite difficult to ask for treatment at the time because mental health was stigmatized. Cobain's sense of overwhelm grew over the years. His continuous suffering, his personal difficulties, and the burden of celebrity all accumulated. His heroin addiction exacerbated his problems, which were recognized by others. To deal with their emotions, many bipolar disorder sufferers, including Cobain, resorted to drugs or alcohol. Even though his music was successful, he frequently discussed feeling confused and unable to meet all of the demands placed on him. As April 1994 approached, Cobain's loved ones made an effort to assist him. Following a severe overdose in Rome that many people thought was not an accident, his wife Courtney Love and his friends collaborated to organize an intervention. To discuss the situation with him, they all met at his house in Seattle on March 25. Hours passed during the emotional meeting. Cobain first objected to attending a detox program, but he ultimately consented. However, he abruptly changed his mind and refused to go when it was time to depart for therapy, but after some consideration, he did go. Everything changed when Kurt Cobain made a decision on April 1, 1994. After checking in just 36 hours ago, he fled the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles to be treated. At approximately 7:25 p.m., he scaled a 6-foot wall and escaped detection. Wearing torn jeans and a red and black striped sweater, he departed without informing anyone of his destination. After that, Cobain rode in a taxi to the Los Angeles airport, where he boarded a flight to Seattle under the alias Bill Bailey. Cobain did not immediately return home after arriving in Seattle. The following few days were spent relocating, including to his friend Dylan Carlson's house. His behavior at this time was concerning. He went to a gun store in Seattle on April 2nd and purchased several shotgun shells. Later, the cabbie who drove him there recalled that Cobain had said he needed the shells because someone had broken into his house. Several others saw him in Seattle during the course of the following few days, but he seemed aloof and solitary. He was reported missing on April 3rd by his mother, Wendy O'Connor, who expressed concern for his safety. In order to find him, his wife, Courtney Love, also engaged Tom Grant, a private investigator. Cobain spent his last days in his residence on Lake Washington Boulevard, where he returned in silence. An electrician called Gary Smith came to Cobain's home on April 8, 1994, to install a security system. Around 8:40 a.m., he was working close to the garage when he noticed something in the window of a tiny greenhouse above it. He believed it was a mannequin at first, but upon closer inspection, he saw it was Cobain. Smith notified the authorities right away, and officers quickly showed up. Inside the greenhouse, Cobain's body was discovered with a shotgun close by. A note intended to Boda, his fictional boyhood pal, was found close to him. In it, Cobain talked about feeling worn out and losing interest in making music. "For too long, I haven't experienced the thrill of both writing and listening to music," he wrote. A few days earlier, on April 5, 1994, Cobain had died, according to a later medical assessment. High levels of chemicals that might have affected his physical and mental health at the time were also found in his system, according to the investigation. With this, an important chapter in the history of music came to an end. Beyond the music industry, the news of Cobain's death shocked everyone. Fans gathered in their numbers for a public vigil at the Seattle Center on April 10. People gathered to play Nirvana songs, weep, and exchange memories. Courtney Love gave the public a window into Cobain's thoughts in his last days by attending the vigil and reading portions of the text. The occasion demonstrated the extent to which he had impacted supporters' lives globally. With Cobain's death, the grunge movement that characterized music in the early 1990s also came to an end. Tours were cancelled by bands like Pearl Jam while they dealt with the death of a member of their peer group. Cobain's difficulties brought attention to the demands of celebrity and the difficulties that musicians encounter in the music business, igniting crucial discussions around substance abuse and mental health. The 30th anniversary of her father's passing, April 5, 2024, saw Frances Bean Cobain give a moving homage to Kurt Cobain. In an emotional Instagram post, she quoted a letter Kurt gave to her prior to her birth. "Or wherever I go, I will always be with you." These words, written in 1992, have become a source of comfort for Frances, who was just 20 months old when her father passed away. She also shared rare photos, including 2 from their last moments together. Frances talked about how her grandmother, Wendy Cobain, used to press Frances' hands to her cheeks and say they felt just like Kurt's. This small act became a powerful connection to her father. Frances spoke about the pain of never knowing Kurt personally. She wondered about the little things, how his voice sounded, how he liked his coffee, or what it would feel like to be tucked in by him at bedtime. She imagined them catching tadpoles together during hot summers in Washington, or him smelling of Camel Lights and strawberry Nesquik. Things she had heard were his favorites. Despite the sadness, Frances said grief has taught her important lessons. She wrote, "The biggest lesson learned through grieving for almost as long as I've been conscious is that it serves a purpose." She described how grief, pain, joy, and life are deeply connected and how those contrasts give life its meaning. As Kurt's only child, Frances inherited his estate, which has been both a blessing and a challenge. In 2017, court records revealed she was earning over $100,000 a month from her father's publicity rights and dividends, totaling $1.2 million a year. However, her monthly expenses were more than $206,000, showing how difficult it can be to manage such wealth. Frances admitted feeling guilt about the inheritance, saying it feels like a loan she could never pay back. She compared it to receiving money from someone she never really got to meet. Over time, she took control of her finances, working with advisors, and realizing that living well doesn't have to mean living extravagantly. Frances has also taken on her father's legacy in other ways. She has been open about mental health and addiction, issues that deeply affected Kurt's life. By sharing her own struggles, she helps reduce stigma and encourages others to seek help. She has also been involved in protecting her father's artistic vision. In 2018, she helped oversee the 20th anniversary release of Nirvana's In Utero. Francis worked to balance respecting Kurt's intentions with giving fans something special.